Hello, lovely sewing friends. So today I'm going to do another little tutorial for you guys, and I'm going to show you the importance of clipping a curved seam like this one here. Now, when you get a bit more into your sewing, you'll come across quite a few curved seams. So you'll see these on armholes, necklines, and pockets in particular. So learning how to do a curved seam, first of all, sewing a curved seam and clipping a curved seam is really, really important to have a professional finish on your sewing projects. So I'm just going to take you through what I've got here. You may notice I've got this mat here, this grey mat, and this is actually an ironing board because I'm trying out this new mini iron from Birch. And so far, I absolutely love it because what I've managed to do is just iron all of that so nice and easily just by sitting down at my desk here. Next up, I have these fabric scissors from LDH. And the important thing I'm going to show you guys with these is that they've got like a flat tip. They're not a point. And then I also have these snips from LDH. These are more commonly used for like cutting thread tails and curved seams. But first of all, I'm going to show you guys why we clip a seam like this, because I'm just going to pop these out of the way for a second. So let's imagine this is either your neckline or a pocket. And if we just turn it inside out, right side out, like you normally would, like that, it's not going to lie exactly flat, and there's going to be a couple of gathers or puckers in this line, right? In this stitch line here. So when we iron it, it's got more volume in that outer edge than it does this inner edge, so it can pucker up on the inside. So the way that we correct that is we are going to clip this seam allowance on the inside. Now, the way that we're going to do that is we're going to lie this nice and flat, and I'm going to take you guys in because this is detailed work now. So typically snips are used for the job of clipping into a seam allowance as they're really nice and easy to hold. And I can just go along and snip into my seam allowance like that. However, you can also choose to use a bigger pair of scissors. However, you will not get as much control over your direction or your angle because you've got a lot more to handle with. So I'm going to show you guys with the snips first. So I'm going to start up here on this part here. Now your seam allowance is normally 1 centimeter, and the goal with snipping a seam is that you do not want to snip that stitch line there. I'll bring you guys in just a little bit more. There we go. So with our snips here, we're going to go into the seam allowance, but not through that stitch line. So you can see there, I've gone to the stitch line, but not through the stitch line. And that is very important because what we want to achieve is to allow this seam allowance a little bit more ease to lie flat when we turn it inside out. So I can go along this seam allowance here. Whoops. I can go along this seam allowance here, making snips into the seam allowance every 2.5 centimeters. And the kind of general rule with clipping a seam allowance is, especially on a curve, the tighter the curve, so let's say you've got like a really tight curve, the more frequent you'll have to do snips. but the kind of shallower and more gradual the curve, the less frequent you have to do them. So you've seen me do that with snips. I'm going to now show you how I would do it with these pair of LDH bigger 9-inch scissors. If you're a beginner, stick with the snips, but if you do have a pair of longer scissors that have a blunt end, that is very important. This blunt end will allow me to go to the stitch line, but not through the stitch line. You see there how I've stopped just short of the stitch line. Like that. Taking it very nice and gradually all along there. So there are several things that you can do in order to level up your sewing, and clipping a seam is one of them. You'll only snip a seam if it's included in a lining, or you're not going to see the seam allowance. You wouldn't overlock a seam. Like, I would never overlock this seam allowance edge, raw edge here, and then snip into it, because then the overlocking is going to all come undone. So you tend to do this on a raw seam, and then let's say that this would be included in the lining of the garment, or on a facing. There we go. So I'm going to take you guys back out, and now what we're going to do is I'll show you kind of one way you can get that nice crisp edge. So I'm gonna get my iron, my little mini iron. I love this. So just ironing it all down. You can use a bigger iron by all means. However, if you're working on a small piece like this, I would recommend getting a little mini iron like this. So this one's perfect. It's lovely so far. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just start from one end. I'll just bring you guys back down a little bit. And what I'm going to do is fold back one layer of that seam allowance, right? So that's the bottom layer. This is the top layer here. Now, you could always do this step before clipping, because then you won't have to do, folding all these little pieces back. However, if you fold back and iron first, you'll have to clip each layer of fabric individually, or you can clip first and then fold back each layer of fabric individually. So either way, you're going to have to do it anyway. So got my little mini iron here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to place it down on the bottom layer of fabric and push those layers back. So you see there? I might just turn up the heat on this just a wee bit. Get some steam going here. So I'm just going to turn that around. Oops. And water. Okay, that was my bad. That's okay. Great thing about ironing is that you can easily just iron away the water. So, and I'm going to have no creases there, so haha. So what I'm going to do, see, you can see how that layer is now all pressed back and the under layer is all going that way. So what I'm going to do, go along, and I think, see, I'm just using my fingertips to gently pull back those layers. Like that. A little bit of steam here and there. This is the first time I'm ever using this iron. So there are a few little teething issues with that water, but I'm really liking it so far. Because then I can show you guys all of these new little techniques. So I'm just slowly going through. Ooh. Top tip, if you're a little bit nervous with putting your fingers this close to the iron, a pair of tweezers is always really good for that kind of stuff. And you can always move around your seam and just work at it from different angles, like this. I always find that doing these extra little bits are actually some of my favorite, because you actually get to take your time with doing each step, you know? And these extra steps really pay off, because when it's all pressed out and it's all nicely finished, you know that you've done the best job. You know that you took those extra steps to make it really, really nice. So, and as you can see, it doesn't take very long at all. Oh, more water here and there. So you can see I've pressed back that top layer, left the bottom layer nice and flat, and then we're going to turn this inside out. And what that does by pressing, it brings that stitch line. I purposefully used white thread, matches my nails, thank you. And we're going to press that stitch line to the edge. Now, if you were doing something like a neckline, you could always do an edge stitch on that, which is good. It's another sewing technique that I'll show you guys at some point. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to use my fingers to roll. Bring you guys in a little bit closer. I'm going to use my fingertips just to roll that stitch line to the edge. And then get my iron and go along and press. Clean up that water just while I'm there, so you can see how crisp that stitch line is. And that is why you clip. That is why, oh sorry, I'm wiggling you with my glasses again. That is why you clip and you take these extra steps, because then you get beautiful crisp lines like that. Like, that is lovely. And we're just going to go along. And you can see here, okay, I'll show you exactly what I just did there. By holding that top layer and then pushing that stitch line to the edge. A lot of finger work here. And then again, going through with that iron, keeping that stitch line on the edge. I love how I can show you guys how to do this, because now, sorry, that was my speaker going off there, but you can see how smooth that line is. And like, that's only taken us what, like 15 minutes? 10 or so minutes? And that curve is a finished curve seam. Isn't that beautiful? So to recap, you got to snip that using a pair of taper, kind of blunt. Would you call those blunt? No, they're more like what do you call them? Like flat edge, flat tip scissors. Or you can use the snips. If you're a beginner, use snips. More advanced, you can use those. But having that clipped line on the inside, that clipped seam allowance, has you can see here, you can see right here, here's a perfect example, right? Oh, again, I'm sorry, I moved you. You can see right there how that excess, that seam allowance, remember how I said that this line has more volume in it than the stitch line. So by clipping it, we have allowed those two pieces of fabric to overlap ever so slightly. That's probably like 2 millimeters, but 2 millimeters along each of those snips to overlap each other has allowed the interior seam to lie nice and flat. And that is why we snip our seam allowance when a curve happens, because now that all of that interior seam allowance is nice and flat, and there's going to be no little puckers all along there. So there we have it. That is why you clip a curved seam allowance. Hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial. Make sure to hit like and subscribe for more sewing tips and tricks.